And good afternoon and welcome to TPM 2023 that's presented by S&P Global Market Intelligence. I'm Steve Ferreira, host of Ocean Freight TV, and I'm joined today by my good friend Mark Szakonyi, director at S&P Global Market Intelligence and executive editor at the Journal of Commerce. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
I'm so glad to see you.
It's a good show. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you very much. I see the BCOs are really enjoying themselves and getting a lot out of the educational content. The JOC and S&P has really put together a hell of a show.
Yeah, I mean, we've got about 3,700 folks, and a little under perhaps 600 unique BCO companies, and roughly, I want to say 1,100 logistics managers representing those BCOs. So there's a lot of freight. I can't give you a TU number, but a lot of freight.
I'm really excited that you put a number to that. I didn't realize there were over 600 BCOs.
Nearly 600 individual BCOs.
That's stunning. Stunning. You know, it's actually raising a really good point. I read, a little birdie told me in your bio that you're really good at expressing and writing about the human element. Now, tonight, BCO and carrier are in a bar, and they're kind of fighting about Container-geddon and what happened over the last 2 years, and how would you arbitrate that? What would you say to them to settle them both down?
Well, whatever we're here now, it's going to change. You know, you've been in this industry for long enough. You realize that there's cycles. This cycle that we see may seem a little bit more aggressive and sharper. But, there's the shippers need the carrier and the carrier needs the shipper. I think we heard from my colleague, Peter Tershwell, on Monday morning, the need to look forward. It's hard to move forward after frustration, but ultimately with the number of supply chain issues that are on the horizon, whether it be some of the geopolitical risk we heard from General Petraeus or Dr. Bruce Jones, or just, pressures in terms of inland disruption and so on, really kind of harping on the past is a luxury we don't have.
Yeah, I totally see that. I think that one of the undercurrents that I'm seeing a little bit with BCOs is that there was still a little bit of a dynamic tension in the air, I think, between carrier and BCOs are still struggling. And, we talked a little bit with Eric Johnson today, for example, as a potential lag effect of what maybe a rebirth of consumer buying behavior might have in later 2023, or perhaps the fact that inventory levels are a bit lower. And maybe we see some new activity that maybe makes a marked change in the dynamics for example, in the Trans-Pacific, right? Ocean rates. Now, taking that into consideration, when you look at that, what surprises might you see coming up out of 2023 that might run akin to that, or might give our BCO viewers a chance to take notice of, your intellect and expertise on this question?
Well, I mean, there's the uncertainty, of course, with the ILWU on the U.S. West Coast. We've got, U.S. demand could possibly roar back faster. So there's stronger surges in the second half.
Sure.
There's always the risk of cyber attacks, weather, all the other external forces that can shake the supply chain. So, when you talk about the shipper and the carrier, I think what's happening here is a dance. You've got a sense that, you want to find a price that keeps you in the line of sight of the carriers. So if capacity does get tight in the second half and demand is stronger, sure, and we see the capacity on the water managed, when things get tight, it's those kind of relationships and that sense of, hey, you know what, you could have taken me to the bone during service annual contracts, but you left a little bit on the table and now I can help you out because as I do, that, there's the contracts, but it's really the trust and the human relationship that keeps that contract binding.
And, that's so true. And a lot of that starts right here at TPM, where, these relationships get fostered and groomed and they grow and they are reborn. And a lot of new participants are coming into the supply chain, so they have a chance to, start to see some of the value of attending a conference like this, where one of the nice things I found was the Academy. TPM Academy was a home run. I would love to find a way that you guys could keep that going for our new BCO participants that are coming into the trade for the first time, because I think that educational component, Mark, is going to really put them over the edge. How did you feel about the TPM Academy, and how do you see it perhaps continuing in whatever way the JOC and S&P sees fit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical for TPM. You're right. We're getting a lot of new people, folks that, frankly, have the luxury of not paying that much attention to their supply chain, are realizing that they come here, they need to engage with their carriers. They may need to find new forwarder partners. So that is all constructive. The TPM Academy really is an outgrowth of what the Journal of Commerce is trying to do every day, which is provide not only accurate information, but thorough. So taking in all the different angles, understanding the nuances of the industry and where different people are coming from to provide kind of the best view of what's happening in the market. And that's education. That's helping not only the senior logistics manager that has been in this business for 25, 30 years,
Sure.
but somebody that's just coming in, or maybe they're coming in from the procurement side and this is all new. So it's the idea of kind of providing that level playing field of clear information. And that's why the TPM Academy makes so much sense, because it's the idea of, listen, we're not going to tell you what is right or wrong. That's not our place, but we're going to give you the best information out there, provide you the nuance and the context of what we've seen through our institutional wisdom so you can make better decisions. And I think one of the things about TPM Academy is that it's coming from folks that we know in the industry that trust. So these are the folks that we are talking to regularly. So it seems like a natural extension to say, hey, take that knowledge and instead of giving it to me on the print page, give it to this audience.
And it's so true. I'm close to Dan Gardner. Dan and I have done some LinkedIn Live events together, and he's a wealth of knowledge. He's actually one of the persons that helped put this on the map. And
Yep.
when I see somebody like Dan, and moving into the space of expertise, it's exactly what you're saying, where these experts can really start to give their kudos to the newcomers to the trade and help everyone to learn. So I think it's so vital that the JOC continues that process in whatever way that matriculates itself through your writings, through the trainings, through strategy sessions. It was well done.
Well, thank you. And it's also, it's organic, because, what makes TPM work is the reporting that we do every day, the interaction that we have with the top leaders, with some of the major shippers, and even some of the small and medium-sized shippers. So being plugged into the industry, having to build and keep that trust all the time, then allows us to not only be tapped into the industry, but when we need to kind of pull it together and address the big issues, bring the right people together, it's a natural outgrowth of what we do every morning.
Sure. Mark, let's switch gears for a second. And, one of the things that's been on my mind a lot is I've been an expert witness at the FMC level for 4 different cases.
Yep.
I think that this year more than ever, BCOs are starting to look at what the Biden administration has done, what the FMC has done, governmental regulations, OSHA. It's all come together in a perfect storm. But yet at the same time, I feel that perhaps government alone cannot solve the problems or the deadly sins that might have occurred during Container-Geddon. I'm wondering what your take might be for BCOs when they look at, or they say, oh, the FMC has this new resolution board, or we can go to the FMC for a dispute. I think the marriage between government solutions and commercial solutions is a slippery slope. I'm just wondering, how does the JOC see it in terms of where BCOs might get relief going forward in terms of, commercial services like auditing or recovery or detention demurrage, or FMC cases where they're more formalized, which could cause more friction? Any take on that?
Well, I would say, things move slowly when it comes to bureaucracy. And while the FMC has been a longstanding institution coming out of the Kennedy administration, it was not as active as it was in prior leadership. But we've seen with FMC Chairman Daniel Mathey and some of the other commissioners, I wouldn't say activists, but far more responsive. And part of that has been forced by the disruption. You show up on the national headlines, it goes up to the White House. Right. You've got to be jockeyed into action. I think what I would tell the shippers is that the avenues for them to seek relief and make proposals are much clearer and smoother, particularly when I think of the complaint process that came out of Ozero. Yet, there's limits to that. We know that even because you put a charge complaint, that doesn't necessarily trigger an investigation. There's a threshold of information that's needed before the FMC can start this investigation. And secondly, the FMC has been very clear that while Congress is putting on giving them stronger and, more expansive marching orders, their budget hasn't reflected that. And Daniel Maffei has repeatedly said that, hey, there's more that we can be investigating, but we've got to focus on what we have. So I would say, I think there's better access. The FMC yesterday, chairman at his town hall was encouraging folks to, file charge complaints. But I also take your point in the sense that, there's an issue of, and I think the FMC is very, very aware of this, that they don't want to over-regulate. And frankly, there's a limit to what they can do within the restrictions of the Shipping Act. So that is why you've seen over the last couple of years, definitely folks, namely, I would say Commissioner Dye, really kind of driving these kind of commercial solutions. So kind of coming to a common language, finding best practices. Yet, I think you're also seeing that that's bumping into the limits of what can be done. So you've got the FMC now here trying to, say, hey, listen, we're investigating. You've seen what they've been doing in terms of looking at some of the carrier files, all of that stuff. Sure. But these things move slowly. And I think anybody thinking that Ozero was going to be this magic bullet, and frankly, it was clouded by the fact that it became, it was cited as possibly bringing U.S.-China trade more balanced. It can't do everything. It's a modest change to the Shipping Act that it gives the FMC a little bit more power, but they ultimately are restrained by the Shipping Act. So I think what's going to happen is the shippers and the industry are going to be saying, hey, we want you to do more. They want more. They got to go back to Congress and convince them to take another crack at the Shipping Act.
Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard a PhD dissertation on exactly what OSHA is and is not. It was one of the best well laid out.
Oh, thank you.
Logical.
You're right about it. You got to learn how to talk about it.
Last but not least, I wanted to ask you a question, and it's something I asked Lars Jensen, and Lars will talk more about it tomorrow, but I was wondering, with the breakup of the 2M alliance, could we possibly be in a de facto rate war and not know it right now?
Well, there's definitely folks that are arguing that we are in a rate war. You've got Sea Intelligence, Alan Murphy. I think Drury's Philip DeMoss has said we're in a rate war. The other side is I've been cautioned in the sense that saying, listen, that the demand has fallen so sharply that you're not. Yes, the prices are lowering, but they're not undercutting in the same way that we saw in years past. But as you've heard in this conference, that big black box question of what is fair to the carrier to cover their operating costs and give them some profit so they can make further investment.
Sure.
And that is always going to be unclear. So yeah, I think it's going to be increasingly difficult. On the future of the alliances, I believe we're going to hear from Lars tomorrow talking, and I imagine he kind of hinted at this, that he thinks that there's going to be some more shares changed in the two existing alliances.
Sure.
I would say, though, if you looked at Jan Tiedeman's presentation yesterday of Alphaliner, he made the point, well put, that it's less about the size of the carrier, but how much they're putting in the alliance. So the alliance carriers are putting way more of their capacity into the alliance. And the Ocean Alliance is also very equally split. But when you look at 2M, yes, even though MSC is the much larger carrier, it's Maersk that has been throwing more capacity into the alliance. So I say that in the sense that, yes, 2M fell apart, and it was clearly because of differing strategies, not only in terms of the company, but also approaches to the order book. It may be, I think it's a little bit more balance on those alliances, so you may not see those things change as fast. I'm not going to make any predictions on that, but just looking at the way that they're operating together, there are clear benefits for some of those medium-sized carriers to stay in an alliance.
Absolutely. I think it's going to really be interesting to see how that plays out. And, as we start to think about the last question I have for you today is that, will this be the year, Mark, where direct ocean carriers, matter like Maersk or CMA, that are offering edge-to-edge or end-to-end services, Will they start to take back some market share from NVOCCs or freight forwarders? How do you see that playing out?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I think of it in a Venn diagram. So you've got the carriers and then you've got the forwarders, and there's a certain little center in which they're kind of competing. And not all carriers are competing for that business. Sure. And not all forwarders see carriers as competitors. You know, for the challenge for Maersk as it's embraced on its integrator strategy is really, I think, coming down to these service contracts, because last year they had the tailwind of being able to say, listen, you know, we can help you in terms of your capacity. We want to give you try this integrator thing out and give it a roll.
Right.
Now we're going to see whether the integrator was really the value to the shippers in terms of what they're willing to put into this new annual service contract. And frankly, you can hear it by the words, but we're only going to really be able to see it probably in the third quarter earnings of Maersk. And that's when you need to look at the non-logistics revenue. Now, granted, you're going to have to separate that from all the acquisitions that come in.
Right.
But we saw from Vincent Plurk in first quarter earnings saying, yes, our non-logistics revenue has slipped here. However, the 200 top shippers that were focusing on those Western brands that are increasingly reaching deeper into China,
yes,
they're giving us more business. So I think it's too soon to say whether the integrator thing is going. And I would also say is that, you know, this is not a clear line. You know, it could be very easy that the integrator thing starts getting a certain business. It falls back a little bit.
Right.
It's a long strategy. And I think, you know, the question really is, you know, as this has been tried before, if it starts to wobble, is Maersk going to double down or they're going to adjust? And one of those ways that you could possibly see that adjustment is how quickly and how far they go back to the forwarders for business.
That is a very interesting key. You know, believe it or not, in the early iterations of this integration, Maersk was also planning on offering freight oddity. Right. It was just amazing the things that they wanted to cover. So I think time will tell how this all plays out. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Mark Szakonyi, Executive Editor at the Journal of Commerce. Mark, it's just been an honor to have you today on Oceanfront TV. I'm glad that TPM is a success. Thank you for having us on camera today.
Very good. Hope to see you next year.
Thank you.
Thanks.